woman sitting alone at the most beautiful table in the most beautiful restaurant in the city. Candles flickering. Soft music drifting through the warm air. The city glowing gold through the floor-to-ceiling windows like something out of a dream. 2 champagne flutes on the table, both empty, both untouched. A dress the color of late autumn. Hair pinned perfectly. Hands folded in her lap with the careful stillness of someone who has been practicing composure for so long it has become a second language. And a phone sitting face down on the white table cloth. Is not looking at the door anymore. She stopped looking at the door 45 minutes ago. Because somewhere between the third time the waiter came by and the moment she realized the couple at the next table had finished their entire meal, Ford, while she was still waiting for hers to begin, something inside her quietly, completely broke, not loudly, not dramatically, just the way a light goes out when the power cuts. One moment it is there, and then it is not. Now let me ask you something, and I want you to really sit with this question before the story begins. These TNs. Have you ever given everything you had, everything you were, to someone who treated you like a backup plan? Have you ever made yourself smaller, quieter, less, just to fit into the space someone else decided you were allowed to occupy? Have you ever loved someone so completely that you didn't notice until it was almost too late that they were never really loving you back? Because that is exactly where Margaret Calloway was on that October evening, sitting at a table set for 2, alone, on her anniversary, having prepared for a week, having hoped for months, having waited, if we are being completely honest with each other, for 4 long years. And here is the thing about this story that I need you to stay for. The hustle sells. Because what happens next is the part that nobody in that restaurant could have predicted. The stranger walked toward for the tables line, and by the time that evening was over, nothing about Margaret Calloway's life would ever be the same again. Pacosa. Welcome back to Mr. David Love Stories. If this is your first time here, I need you to hit that subscribe button and turn on the notification bell right now, because this channel is where real stories live. Stories about love and loss and the extraordinary things that happen when you finally decide that you deserve better. Watching the cell. I put everything into every single story on this channel, and today's story is one that I genuinely believe could change the way you see yourself. So get comfortable, because we are just getting started. Her name was Margaret Calloway. 33 years old. Landscape architect. Based in Portland, Oregon, in a city that understood rain and green things, and the particular beauty of some persisting through difficult conditions. She ran a small but respected firm out of a converted warehouse studio in the Pearl District, where her drafting table sat beside a wall of windows that looked out over a courtyard she had designed herself. Moss between the pavers. A Japanese maple that turned the color of fire every October. A small stone bench beneath it, where she sometimes sat with her coffee and let herself still be still before the day began. She was the kind of professional who saw potential in places other people had already given up on. Derelict lots. Abandoned courtyards. Concrete spaces that the city had forgotten. She could stand in the middle of what looked like nothing and describe, with complete conviction, and startling specificity. The living, breathing, beautiful full thing it was trying to become. Her colleagues called it vision. Her clients called it magic. She called it listening. She believed that spaces had a language, and that the best thing a designer for the Janine de Forchardisation could do was learn to hear it before picking up a pencil. There was a project she had been working on for nearly a year when this story begins. An old industrial lot in southeast Portland, 3/4 of an acre of cracked concrete and rusted fencing that the city had earmarked for community use without any clear idea of WZRUs. That meant Margaret had taken the commission when no one else wanted it. She had walked the site alone on a grey February morning, hands in her pockets, bootsing over crunching thing, over debris, and she had almost decided on the design she would present to the committee. Then she found the lupine growing through a crack in the concrete right in the center of the lot where nothing had any business growing at all. Purple. Defiant. Absolutely certain of itself in a place that had given it no reason to be certain of anything. She had stood there for a long time looking at it, and then she went back to her studio and redesigned the entire east section of the project around it. It's on a thought valleys, because something that determined, she decided, deserved a plan built around it rather than over it. That was Margaret Calloway in professional form. Generous, attentive, someone who believed that what was already growing deserved to be honored. The painful irony, the one her sister Rosie pointed out more than once with the gentle bluntness of someone who loves you too much to let you lie to yourself, gentle sign hodge self, later you lie to see yourself, was that Margaret applied this philosophy to everyone and everything in her life except herself, tore off herself. She was, as I said at the beginning, a lighthouse. Poured her light outward, constantly and generously. She guided other ships to shore. She warned of the rocks. She illuminated every path that was not her own. And then she stood on her cliff and burned quietly for whoever needed it, which was everyone, and for herself, which was no one. And for 4 years, the person she had been burning brightest for was a man named Philip Hart. ELEP was a commercial photographer, attractive in the way that certain people are attractive, which is to say effortlessly and almost unfairly. The kind of man who looked good in every photo he was never supposed to be in. He had a quick intelligence and an easier smile and the very specific talent of making whoever of all ciphers sexual style he was focused on feel, in that precise moment, like the most fascinating subject he had ever encountered. Uncountable. The problem was the camera metaphor, and it was one that Rosie had offered once over wine in a way that lodged itself permanently, says my deceptionally, in Margaret's mind, even as she argued against it. His attention works like a camera shutter, Rosie had said. It opens wide. And it's brilliant, and it floods you with this incredible light, and then it clicks shut, and you're standing there in the dark trying to figure out what you did wrong. Margaret had told her she was being dramatic, that she had not forgotten the metaphor. Because the truth was that over 4 years, Philip's shutter had been closing more frequently and staying closed for longer. And Margaret, who was skilled at working with what was already there rather than what she wished were there, and had quietly begun redesigning herself around his absences, making herself smaller in the social spaces where she had once been expansive, excessive, 40 spundles of. muting the opinions she used to offer freely, laughing more carefully, taking up less room, more nottering herself for signs of being, as Philip had put it on more than one occasion. A lot. She stopped painting at home because he had called it a phase. He stopped suggesting weekend plans because he usually had something else. She stopped telling long stories at dinner because she had caught him checking his phone phone Peath Nowlaw's 2003 minutes in one too many times. And the self-consciousness had become permanent. None of it happened dramatically. None of it happened in a single conversation or zesh or a single moment. It happened the way erosion happens, slowly, invisibly, one small particle at a time, until one day you look at the landscape and realize that something significant is gone and you cannot point to the exact moment its exact point it left.
Yo, so studded off at all.
Rosie saw it. Margot's colleague Delia saw it. Probably the barista at her regular coffee shop saw it, for all she knew. But Margot kept her face composed and her voice steady, and her heart resolutely, stubbornly convinced that patience was a virtue and love was a practice, and she simply needed to be more understanding and less demanding, and perhaps a little quieter still. And so the woman who had once redesigned an entire project around a wildflower growing through concrete was slowly, methodically, with Joffre's methodical top C, allowing herself to be paved over, till the night of October 15th. Till Vantage Point Restaurant, until the table set for two, where only one person ever intended to arrive. A reservation had been Margot's idea. She wanted you to know that, even though she almost never told anyone, because it was the detail that sharpened the sting into something unbearable. She had suggested it. She had researched the restaurant, made the call, given her credit card number to hold the table. She had circled the date on her calendar 3 weeks in advance with a small private hopefulness that she would not have admitted to anyone, including herself. Philip had said sure, sounds good, in the way he said most things that did not particularly interest him, and she had decided that was enough. She had told herself that she did not need him to be the one who thought of things, and said uns. She told herself that what mattered was the evening itself, not who made it happen. E told herself a lot of things. She bought a dress the week before, deep russet with gold undertones, the kind of color that looked exactly like the last warm moment before winter closes is in.
Cancer, this is a saint with the sausages.
She had her hair pinned up with soft curls at the temples and wore the amber drop earrings that had belonged to her grandmother. A woman who believed that every occasion worth attending was worth dressing for properly. E arrived at Vantage Point at 7:30. The restaurant sat on the west hillside, and its floor-to-ceiling windows framed the city below like a painting that changed every hour. 4 souls of half-fight. The light that evening was the particular amber of early October dusk, and the city was just beginning to come alive with the glow of street lamps and lit windows and the distant Ratrieben Drejchi of the river catching the loss tea of the day. The air inside smelled like cedar and warm bread and the faint PEA and the faint green scent of the small herb arrangements on every table. The hostess led her to the corner window table she had requested. She sat down. She smoothed her dress. She looked out at the city and allowed herself, just for a moment, to feel something she rarely permitted anymore. Ope, 7:45, arrived without Philip. She opened the menu and read it carefully, which gave her hands something to do.
Oh, glow!
She sent a message. Here, and waiting. The table is beautiful. You're going to love the view. She set the phone down and looked at the door. The waiter came by. Professional, kind, and absolutely terrible at concealing the killing the playful empathy of someone watching something unfold unfold that they cannot stop. She ordered sparkling water and told him they were just waiting on the other party. 20, she called. The call went directly to voicemail. She left no message. 30. The waiter appeared again. She ordered bread, because having bread on the table meant there was still a reason to stay, and she was not ready to stop having a reason. She watched the couple 2 tables overshare a dessert. She watched the man at the table by the bar make his date laugh so hard she covered her mouth with both hands. She watched a woman in a yellow dress lean across the table and say something that made the person on across from her look at her like most where she was the most important was of the day thing in the room. And Margaret sat with her water and her bread and her phone face down on the white tablecloth, and she practiced which she had always been very good at. To 8:45, her phone lit up. Otter call. A text message. He looked at it. Hey, sorry, got caught up at Marcus's going away thing. These things run long, you know how it is. Can we do this another time? She read it twice. He set the phone down very carefully. The way you handle something you are terrified of smashing. She looked out the window at the city she loved. All that amber, light and quiet movement. And your services. All those lit windows behind which people were having meals and conversations and evenings that someone had planned for them. And then she looked at the empty chair across from her. Marcus's going away thing. Work event, an event that had not existed, as far as she knew, when she had spoken to Philip that morning. An event that had apparently materialized out of thin air and swallowed her entire anniversary dinner, without a phone call, without a charter warning, or so, without a single moment in which Philip had thought to himself, Margaret is sitting at our restaurant right now, Mount Saul 4 Saul Drew 4. I should let her know. That was the part that broke her. Not the absence, the arithmetic of it. The quiet, devastating calculation of his priorities, in which she did not appear on the list at all. He did not cry. She was too practiced for that and too tired. She simply sat with the wreckage, very still, while the restaurant hummed warmly around her, and the city burned gold through the gold and through the glass. Then she reached for her purse. A waiter appeared. She asked quietly for the check for the water and the bread. She tipped him generously because none of this was his fault, and because she had always been the kind of person who understood that the people serving you are carrying their own invisible weight. She gathered her things and stood up from the table. Then she did the thing that revealed her more completely than any of what came before. She turned to the waiter and said, I'm so sorry for occupying the table so long. He was apologizing. Even now, at the bottom of her worst evening in years, she was apologizing for existing in a space that someone else might need. She picked up her coat. A voice stopped her. Please drop a crown emoji in the comments right now if you think Margaret should have stayed at that table. Because I need to know you are with me for what happens next. And while you are down there, make sure you have subscribed, because this story is about to change directions in the most extraordinary way. The voice came from her left, measured, warm, carrying the particular quality of someone who selected words carefully and stood behind the ones they used. Not loud, not intrusive. Present in the way that very few things were present in Margaret's life anymore. Please, it said. Don't go. He turned. The man standing a respectful distance from her table was somewhere in his early 40s, with a face that rewarded what sisek lukkainons at a side to court her trauk. Not immediately striking, but quietly and steadily compelling. Dark eyes behind wire-framed glasses. Silver threading through dark hair at his temples in a way that looked like something that had happened naturally and without negotiation. He wore a charcoal jacket over an open-collared white shirt with the sleeves pushed to the elbows, and he held a whiskey glass loosely in one hand, with the body language of someone who had been at the bar long had enough to be relaxed but was still in while still entirely attentively sober. So EEOEE was not looking at her the way men sometimes looked at women in restaurants who appeared to be alone. He was not speculative or calculating. He was not composing an opening line behind his eyes. That's Sarhasha. He was looking at her the way you look at someone you are genuinely and simply concerned about. Direct and careful and devoid of any agenda she could immediately identify. Apologize, he said, before she could find words. I've been sitting at the bar for the past hour. And I noticed that someone made what I can only describe as an orrestrodi desoronatution sorry, not to show up tonight. He paused briefly, choosing his next words with visible care. It seemed like a waste of the evening and of the company. Margaret looked at him. Do you make a habit of approaching strangers in restaurants? Almost never, he said, with an honesty that was somehow also self-deprecating. I'm significantly better in writing a small, contained smile. I'm Elliot Voss. Argot, she said. Argot, he repeated, not performing it, not softening it with a compliment, just receiving it, quite quietly, like something he intended to keep pour jambas. I'm not trying to insert myself into your evening, he said. I genuinely mean that. I just thought, and he paused again, if you wanted company, it seemed like a waste to leave, so. And if you didn't, I will go straight back to my whiskey and my very satisfying solitude and never say another word. E studied him. She studied the precise quality of his stillness, the fact that he had not moved closer, the fact that he had offered her an exit in every sentence he had spoken, the fact that his eyes, when they met hers, held nothing that looked like performance. There was a voice in her head, the responsible, cautious, sensible voice she had been listening to exclusively for years, that said, Aponditotov, you don't know this man. You have had an awful evening, and you are not in a state to make good decisions.
Go home.
Run a bath. Cry somewhere private, which is where you always cry. And then there was another voice, quieter, older, more honest than the first. You have been going home to an empty apartment for 4 years, that voice said. You have been crying somewhere private for 4 years. You have been making yourself invisible for 4 years. And look where that was gotten. Mirasuckers. Standing at a table you set for yourself on your own anniversary, apologizing for the space you occupy. Kyojostos. Maybe just once let someone sit across from you. He looked at the empty chair. She looked back at him. Should warn you, she said slowly. I am genuinely terrible company right now. He considered this with complete seriousness. That's all right, he said. I'm not auditioning for anything. E gestured to the chair. E sat down. He did not immediately speak. He did not fill the silence with noise the way people do when they are nervous or performing. Rotosomatris. He simply sat down, placed his whiskey on the table at the tolls, and picked up the menu with the ease of someone who was entirely comfortable being in a room without controlling it. She watched him read the menu. Oh, he said, without looking up, I have what I consider to be a foundational question. E raised an eyebrow. A foundational question. E looked up. The bread basket. What is your position on filling up entirely on bread before the meal arrives? Something moved in Margaret's chest, something small and rusty, like a hinge that had not been used in a long time. Fatal tang toy. I consider it one of the most important things you can know about a person. She said. He nodded slowly, as though she had confirmed something significant. Then we are going to be completely fine, he said. And Margaret Calloway, sitting at a table where she had spent the last hour falling apart, a full patati, did something she had not done in longer than she could clearly remember. Scientific laughed. Not a polite laugh. Not the careful, monitored kind she had trained herself to produce. A real one, from somewhere deep and unlocked, the kind that surprised her coming out. And Elliot's Voss smiled at the sound of it, like it was exactly what he'd been hoping for. What was not was exoit forced sond was Walschiasus. What followed was not what she expected. She had expected small talk. The performative back and forth of two strangers trying to be charming at each other, the careful surf SLFL exchange, that EJEs that goes. What do you do? Where are you from? Do you come here often? She had expected to be performing a version of herself, and she had expected the performance to be exhausting, and she had expected to go home afterward feeling emptier than when she arrived. What she got instead was a conversation. Elliot asked about her work, not politely, not as an opening move in a game she hadn't agreed to play. He asked the way people ask when they are actually, genuinely curious, with the kind of attention that leans forward and follows up and does not drift sideways, when the answer becomes specific or complicated, almost choicy. She told him about landscape architecture. She told him what it actually was, not that simplified version she kept ready for parties, Dangrod math or fusion, but the real version, the one about the language of space and the psychology of how environments shape human emotion and the particular responsibilities of design eyes ning places where people will live their real, unperformed lives. He did not nod politely and redirect to himself. He stayed with her. He asked what drew her to it originally. He asked how she thought about the relationship between a design and the people who would eventually inhabit it. Ashit Atsidis Pri. He asked whether she believed a space could hold the memory of what had happened inside it. Yes, she said, without hesitating. She told him that was exactly why certain places made you inexplicably sad or calm, or like you had arrived somewhere you were supposed to be. Shentress. She told him that the space carries what happened in it, and that the best design understands that and works with it, rather rare than a race in the sopained Ridafakwat the Fasorimit. Elliot was quiet for a moment. That is exactly right, he said. I have never heard it described that way, but that is exactly right. He told him about the Lupine project, the abandoned lot. The abandoned lot. The February morning. Finding the flower, growing through the crack in the concrete, purple and defiant and completely certain of itself in a place that had given it no reason for certainty. Redesigning the entire east section around it, because something that determined deserved a plan built around it rather than over it. He listened to all of it, and when she finished, he said, "You didn't work around the obstacle. You let it lead." She looked at him across the candlelight. That is exactly what she had done. So? She had never found the words for it before, and he had found them in 30 seconds. A debated design philosophy. She argued that form was primary, and he argued for function, and neither of them convinced the other. Which made the conversation better rather than worse. She noticed, somewhere in the middle of the argument, that she had not apologized for her opinion once. She had not softened her position or trailed off or watched his face for signs of impatience, on-time patience. She had simply disagreed with him clearly and directly, and he had responded by disagreeing back with equal clarity. And thou synthesized the sulphurs of assaults of the fizzles. Both of them had been entirely energized by it. He could not remember the last time that had happened. She told him about a difficult client. She told him the whole story, not the abbreviated, tactful version, but the real one, with all the frustration intact. And he responded with outrage on her behalf that was not performance instinct, but a instinct. He was not calculating the appropriate response. Raisons and the appropriating the appropriate response. He simply responded, which was its own kind of relief. He noticed that he deflected questions about himself, wealth. She called it out directly. "You are very good at redirecting," she said. He smiled, acknowledging it. "Guilty," he said. "I find I'm a better listener than subject." "That's either very humble or very strategic," she said. He thought about it honestly. "Probably both," he said. He made her laugh again when he described, with considerable self-deprecation, his complete inability to keep houseplants alive despite owning 3 separate books on the subject. She told him this was probably information he should have disclosed earlier to disciples alike, given that she had just spent 20 minutes talking about her relationship with living things. Suppelos and living things. He said he was choosing to believe his plants died because they were not ready for the commitment, not because of any heart, because of anything he did. She told him that was the most creative avoidance of responsibility she had heard in some time. He laughed at that, really laughed, thrown back in his chair, entirely unguarded. She thought, this is what it is supposed to feel like. Not the performance of connection, not the anxiety of monitoring yourself for signs of being too much, or too loud, or too anything. Just 2 people in an actual conversation, finding each other genuinely interesting, with nothing at stake and interesting, with nothing at stake and nothing to prove. The food arrived. The bread basket had already been devastated, which they were both comfortable with. She ordered the halibut. He ordered the lamb. They shared a cheese course because she mentioned she never ordered one alone, and he said that was an excellent argument for not eating alone. And somewhere between the cheese and the main course, Margaret told a story about a project meeting that had gone spectacularly sideways due to a miscommunication about the words what feature meant. To the feature, in a landscape context, and she laughed so hard at the the memory that she snorted, suddenly and involuntarily, and immediately covered her mouth with both hands, because Philip had always hated that. She braced for the look. the slight cooling, the barely perceptible highball withdrawal that told her she had been too much. Elliot threw his head back and laughed harder. "Please never do anything with that sound except let it out," he said when he had recovered. "Fid son sauce. That was the best thing I have heard in weeks." Something cracked open inside Margot's chest. Something warm and long-sealed and slightly terrifying. She recognized it distantly, the way you recognize a place you visited once as a child. She recognized it as herself. They had been talking for close to 2 hours when Elliot's tone shifted dramatically, not in a way that would have registered to anyone watching, but Margot, who had spent years reading the subtle weather patterns of other people's moods, caught it immediately. Something in the set of his shoulders, the way he turned his wine glass slowly in both hands, which was what she was beginning to recognize as a sign that he was thinking carefully about what he was about to say. "And I tell you something," he said. "Course," she said. He looked at her steadily. "I wasn't entirely straightforward earlier. About what I do." He felt a small tightening in her chest, the familiar reflex. "Here it comes," the quiet voice said. The other shoe, the thing that explains why someone this attentive and this present was alone at a restaurant bar on a Friday night. "You're not a structural engineer," she said, keeping her voice even. "I am," he said. "That part was true." He paused. "But that's not all of it." He set the glass down. "My full name is Elliot Voss, the Voss Group. I'm the founder." Her words landed and then rearranged themselves and then landed again. A Voss Group. Margot knew that name. Every architect, every landscape designer, every urban planner in Portland knew that name. It appeared on permits and partnership agreements and the kind of conference panels where the decisions that shaped cities were actually mad. It is to sand. The Voss Group was behind 3 of the most significant sustainable infrastructure projects in the Pacific Northwest in the last decade. It was the kind of organization that her colleagues mentioned in the same breath as the future, as in Fara. This is what the future of urban development should look like. E stared at him. "Oh," she started. He said. He looked almost uncomfortable. The embarrassment appeared entirely genuine, which was somehow the most disorienting part. "I know. No. Why didn't you tell me?" she said. "Because," he said, and his voice was so straightforward it was almost startling. "When I sat down at that table, you were talking to me like I was just a person, not a net worth, not a potential collaboration, not a name on a building or a headline or a useful connection. Just a person who happened to be at the same restaurant on the same evening." On the same evening." He paused. "Do you know how rare that is?" She said nothing. "The the conversations I have exist inside a context," he continued. "Everyone already knows who I am before I open my mouth. Which means every conversation, personal, professional, social, is already partly about something other than what's actually being said. There is always a subtext, always an angle, even from people with the best intentions." He looked at her directly. "Tonight, you argued with me about design philosophy for 40 minutes with concrete conviction and didn't once mention Vossi AC, each mention the once mention the Voss Group, or whether we might be useful to each other professionally. You called out my deflection. Awful bad done if deflexed. You laughed at your own stories. You were just entirely and unapologetically yourself, and you had absolutely no idea who I was, and that was, He stopped, and then said it simply, "The most refreshing experience I have had in longer than I can tell you." Margaret absorbed this. She looked at him across the candlelight and the remains of a dinner that had not been planned for either of them. She thought about what she knew of the Voss group. She thought about the gap between what she was, a landscape architect in a medium-sized firm firmed in Portland, Mod-eyed, Denland, and what he represented, which was an entirely different category of person and life and world. And well, Teus I am a landscape architect who spent her anniversary dinner delay alone, and just finished half a bread basket with a stranger jaw, she said. I'm not exactly a compensating factor. He leaned forward slightly. May I tell you what I saw tonight? He said. She said nothing, which he took as permission. I saw a woman who kept her dignity in a moment that would have broken most people. He said, who smiled at the waiter with genuine warmth, even while her heart was clearly falling apart, transsolitide, who apologized for existing in a space she had every right to occupy, who laughed at her own stories like the world hadn't been working hard to make her stop. She shook he shook his head slowly. Whoever didn't show up tonight made an error they will not be able to undo. The do. I say that with complete certainty after knowing you for 2 hours, and I do not say things like that casually. Donsale. And that is when everything shifted, because Margaret looked at him and understood something important. This was nonsense. Flattery. Accent. Flattery was general, warm, designed to land softly. What Elliot had just done was entirely different. He had described her specifically, sis. He had described things he had actually observed. The smile at the waiter, the apology, the apol at the door, the laugh she hadn't been able to help. He had been paying attention, the real kind, the kind that turns detail and tale and names it back to accurate. No one had done that for her in so long that she had almost forgotten it was something people could do. And so at for tuple sons. I'm not asking for anything from this evening, he said quietly. I'm not trying to play a role in someone else's difficult night. I'm just asking if I can see you again. Coffee, a walk, anything you're comfortable with, because I think you are remarkable, Margaret Calloway, and I would like the chance to show you that I mean that. She looked at him for a long moment, and then she said the truest and most courageous thing she had said in 4 years. Would like that, she said. His response was not a smug smile or a satisfied exhale. It was the quiet expression of someone who has just been given something they actually wanted, and who is not taking it for granted. Zontor Condesa Putnoid Fondes. She drove home through streets that were wet from a rain that had come and gone while she was inside the restaurant. All mottos of fide. The city lights lay reflected in long, wavering ribbons across the pavement. She drove with the windows cracked because the air was cold and clean, and she needed to feel it on her face. She parked outside her building and sat in the car for 11 minutes. For Odin or Uriz. She was not thinking about Elliot. She was thinking about the woman who had almost walked out of that restaurant without looking up. The woman who had apologized to the waiter. The woman who had been so thoroughly trained to make a small trained self, for small as it had become, the first move automatic, reflexive. Even in her most broken moments, he was thinking about how long she had been that woman, that woman. And she was thinking, with a clarity that felt new and slightly dangerous, about how much she did not want to be her anymore.
all sores.
He went upstairs.
Also sore.
She changed out of the russet dress and hung it carefully, which it deserved. She made tea. She did not drink, think. She stood in the middle of her living room for a moment in the particular quiet of a very late effort evening in a city that has not entirely gone to sleep. And then she opened the flat drawer beneath her. Her drafting table was a large drawer, wide and shallow, built to hold architectural drawings. A third piece, but pushed to the back of it, far behind the project files and the drafting tools, were her personal sketchbooks, the ones she kept for no purpose except the need to keep them, drawings that had nothing to do with clients or commissions or the careful. A considered work she produced professionally, not a sort of solid, just her own hand, her own eye, her own way of seeing things when no one was asking her to see them in any particular way. She had not opened that drawer in 7 months. ESETEESSATOWN at the drafting table, and she opened the most recent sketchbook to a blank page, and she drew hot, careful, measured, professional drawings. Not the deliberate and restrained work she had been producing for so long. She drew the way she used to draw before she started monitoring herself, chaotic and joyful and sprawling, and lines that didn't know where they were going until they arrived somewhere where true plants bursting through brick, trees with root systems that consumed the whole page, reaching further underground than they were tall above it. A woman standing at the edge of a cliff with her arms wide open and her face tilted toward something vast and uncontrollable, and entirely her own. She drew until the city outside went quiet. She drew until the first grey suggestion of morning began softening the darkness at the edges of the windows. She drew until her hand cramped and she had to stop, and she sat back and looked at what she had made. She recognized herself in it, not the careful, edited, provisional version of herself that she had been presenting to the world for years. The real one. The one she had been before someone's son for Autiopomois had been before someone's con else's critical voice had moved into her head and taken up permanent residence. The woman who had gone into landscape architecture because she believed with complete and somewhat impractical practical conviction the that beauty was not decorative but essential, that it was something people needed in order to remain whole. Either was still in there, was still in the... She had been in there all along. A following morning she called Philip. He had not rehearsed it. She had rehearsed it 100 times in her imagination over the past year, always stopping before the end because the imagined version always devolved into either his anger or her backing down, and she could not find a version in which she came out of it intact. Fish of Possestes. But the actual call was nothing like the rehearsed version, because she had nothing to perform and nothing to prove and nothing left to protect. I think we both know this has run its course, she said. I deserve someone who considers me worth showing up for. That's not an accusation, as null fatfu of I so no von Seishal. It's just what's true, and I should have said it a long time ago. Elip started to respond. She could hear the familiar machinery beginning to turn, the deflection assembling itself, the refrain loading. I'm done. Philip, she said simply. I genuinely wish you well. E ended the call. She sat with her hands in her lap for a moment, aware of how much space she now occupied in her own life. How quiet it was, how clean. Then she opened her phone and sent Elliot a message. Worst coffee in the city, she wrote. "When are we doing this?" His reply arrived in under 4 minutes. "I have been waiting for exactly that message since I got home last night," he wrote. "Tomorrow, on 9 a.m. I'll send you the address." She read it twice, and she smiled in the way that she had not forgotten, the way that came from something genuine and uncomplicated and entirely her own. "Your woe. And here is what I want you to understand about what came next, because this is the part of the story that people sometimes skip over in favor of the grand gestures and the dramatic moments. Oh, and dramatic. And I refuse to skip it because this is actually the most important part. This is what it looks like when someone genuinely chooses you. It does not look like a single spectacular evening, It does not look like expensive gifts or orchestrated surprises or the kind of sweep them so sweeping, cinematic declarations that are designed to overwhelm your defenses rather than earn your trust. Those things are performances. Samuel and Margaret had spent 4 years with a man who was very good at performance and very poor at the consistent, varkenfrossis cyberdontifensation, unglamorous work of actually showing up. Liet showed up. Coffee at 9 a.m. at a small, unimpressive place on Burnside that had, as promised, genuinely mediocre coffee and cinnamon rolls that justified traveling across the city. The side tariff. The coffee was bad and they both said so and ordered second cups anyway, and flandered rice, because the conversation was good and neither of them was ready for it to end. Coffee became lunch. They walked afterward along the waterfront, which neither of them had planned, and talked for another hour and a half in the October cold, because stopping felt arbitrary. He came to the garden project site on a Saturday in November at her invitation, also several, wearing boots that were clearly not designed for a construction site, and carrying 2 coffees. And he walked the lot with her for 2 hours asking questions that revealed the tea of genuine understanding of urban space, spaparts, bosses perfrayes, and communi. Tie design that she had not expected. He asked about the lupine. He wanted to see it, photos this. He stood in front of it for a long moment, this small purple thing growing improbably through and concrete, and said nothing at all. And Sociles sows, which was the right response. Remembered things. This was the detail that affected her most profoundly, because it was the most ordinary, and the most significant. As the facts. He remembered that the community meeting for the guard project was on a Thursday, our foresight our own foresight. He remembered that her sister, Rosie, had started a new job and was anxious about it. He remembered that there was a particular client who had been difficult since the beginning of the commission, and that Margit had almost toned Wauf alles, Houchant of the Rum, down the project and had been second-guessing that decision ever since. He asked about these things. Not once, not as a demonstration, but consistently, naturally, the way you ask about the things you're actually following, because you find them interesting. How did the community meeting go? ELs go, he would ask. How is Rosie settling in? The difficult to clients still being difficult, or has the dynamic shifted? And Margaret would answer and feel, each time, the strange and slightly overwhelming sensation of being paid attention to, of mattering to someone's ongoing curiosity, of being not a backdrop but a subject. He had forgotten that people could do that. About 2 months in, he invited her to an event for the Vosse Group Foundation. The foundation funded sustainable urban green spaces in underserved neighborhoods, which she had not known until he told her, and who saw af. and she had looked at him when he told her with an expression she could not entirely control. "That is my ep," she said. That is my work," she said. "That is the precise intersection of everything I believe architecture and landscape should be doing." "No," he said. "That's why I thought you'd want to see it." Went. She walked into the event in a simple black dress that was not expensive or particularly remarkable. Unforgettable fault the pizza, surrounded by city officials and investment partners and the kind of people who shaped the built environment of entire regions, and entire Rixen, and she felt the familiar flutter of being somewhere she did not quite belong. But Elliot was at her side the entire evening, not in a proprietary way, not in a way that suggested she required managing. Just present the way he was present, which was completely and without distraction. N people asked what she did. She said, landscape architect, and braced for the politely disinterested pivot. Elliot said, Margaret's firm is doing some of the most thoughtful community landscape work in the city right now. She redesigned an entire project around a wildflower she found growing through concrete because she believed the design should work with what was already there. That's the kind of thinking this foundation exists to support, and the conversations that followed were the most substantive professional exchanges Margaret had experienced in years. People were genuinely interested. They asked real questions. They referenced her work as though it had actual weight in the room. She drove home afterward and sat in the parking garage of her building for a moment before going upstairs. Oswald says she was trying to identify the specific feeling she was carrying, and eventually she named it. He felt like herself. Not a managed or edited or cautiously presented version. Just herself, specifically and fully and without apology. She had been away from that feeling for so long that coming back to it felt like walking into a room you had loved and forgotten. If you have ever had someone in your life who made you feel genuinely chosen, I want you to drop that moment in the comments below. Tell me Byload. Tell what it taught us too. It felt like. I read every single comment on this channel, and I want to hear your story. And if you are not subscribed yet, do it now, because we are about to get to the part of this story that nobody expected. Elliot came back in December. Of course he did. There is a particular kind of person who does not fully comprehend what they had until they can see it reflected in someone else's regard. Philippe Aios had always been better at wanting things when they were no longer available than they were sitting directly across from him, and Margaret's name had appeared in a write-up about the Voss Group Foundation event, a small mention in a local architecture publication, so on Olof. Nothing significant on its own, but Philip apparently did some reading after that. He apparently put some things together. He appeared at her office on a Tuesday afternoon without warning. Rosie, who had an instinct for threats the way some people have an instinct for weather, sent a text that arrived 30 seconds before her assistant buzzed up. Philip is downstairs. Do you want me to call you with a fake emergency? He smiled at the text. She wrote back, I'm fine. I've got this. She met him in the reception area. E had not braced herself, she realized, standing there waiting for the elevator doors to open. She had not rehearsed anything. She had not constructed the emotional armor she used to assemble before difficult conversations with him, the careful scaffolding of qualifications and softeners, and strategic retreats. She was simply standing there, arms loosely crossed, expression composed but not closed, waiting to see what he needed to say. He looked diminished. Not obviously, not dramatically. He was still the same attractive, easy-moving man she had spent 4 years beside. But something in the load-bearing structure of his confidence had shifted, and she could see, with the trained eye of someone who understood how things were built and how they failed, exactly where the stress fractures were. "May made mistakes," he said. "A lot of them. I know that now. Believe you," she said. He blinked. He had not expected agreement. "Owe you a real apology," he said. Not for that night specifically. For all of it, for 4 years of it. "Accept that," she said. "And I mean it genuinely." He studied her. She watched him trying to find the version of her he knew, the one who softened when he apologized, who met remorse halfway and further, who made it easier for him to feel better by making herself smaller so there was less of her to have wronged. And Sastasancha. He was looking for that woman. He was not there. Something shifted in his expression. The remorse recalibrated slightly toward something more defensive. "Is this about Voss?" he said, and the easy charm dropped just enough to let the edge through. "She's about me," she said. "The version of me that I stopped being when I was with you. The version I've found again." He looked at her for a moment, and then said the thing that people say when the grace runs out and the wound overtakes the guilt. "You think a man like that actually ends up with someone like you? Those people don't, Margaret. They have women like you for a season, and then they go back to their own world, and you are left exactly where you started. Certed Sothel. Except worse, because now you'll have actually believed it." He felt nothing. Anger. Not the familiar collapse into hurt. Not the reflexive urge to defend herself or prove him wrong. Just a very clear, very quiet recognition that she was looking at someone who had always seen her as a reflection of himself rather than a person in her own Raymond own right and Donai Thyrotas, and who was only now, in the moment of losing her, revealing how completely that had always been the case. "Oo never knew what I was worth," she said. "That was always your limitation, not mine." E walked him to the elevator. She shook his hand, because she was not interested in cruelty, and she had meant it when she said she wished him well. She watched the doors close. She walked back to her drafting table. E sat down. E picked up exactly where she had left off. 8 months after the evening at Vantage Point, Margot told Elliot she loved him. He had not planned it. She had not chosen a setting or rehearsed the words or decided in advance that this would be the moment. It arrived without ceremony, the way the most true things tend to arrive. Not because the conditions were perfect, but because the truth had simply run out of reasons to wait. It was a Sunday morning in January. They were in her kitchen. She was making coffee, which she was genuinely not skilled at despite being a person who cared about detail in every other area of her life. He was at the kitchen table reading a report, with his glasses pushed up his nose and a slight frown of concentration that she had come to think of as one of her favorite arrangements of a human face. Winter light came through the kitchen windows in long pale strips across the floor. Rosie had been there the previous evening and left a small plant on the windowsill, a gesture of approval that Rosie expressed through plants and food and other tangible things, because she was not a person who said everything she felt directly or indirectly. The apartment smelled like coffee and the faint green cold of January morning. Margot stood at the counter and looked at him. She looked at this man who had crossed a restaurant toward her when she had nothing to offer but grief and a dress the color of autumn, who had asked about the lupine and wanted to see it, who remembered Rosie's job and the difficult client and the community meeting on Thursday. Scythe, who had introduced her at the foundation event not as his companion, but as someone whose work mattered, who laughed at her stories and disagreed with her opinions, and looked at her like she was interesting,
so, fulfilled to be
specifically and continuously and without apparent effort, because she was, and the words arrived. "I love you," she said. He said it the way she had said yes to staying at the table 8 months before, without performance, without strategy, without the careful construction of exit routes, just the truth placed in the room. He looked up from the report. He looked at her for a moment, long enough that the word hung in the January air between them, substantial and waiting. Then he took off his glasses. He set them on the table. He stood up. He crossed the kitchen with deliberateness that characterized everything he did with anything value. Friend anything he valued. He held her face in both hands and looked at her directly, the way he had looked at her that first evening, like she was someone worth seeing fully. I have loved you, he said, since you told me that spaces hold memory. Nothing anyone has ever said to me has felt more immediately true. He put her hands over his. They stood in the kitchen in the January light, in the warmth and the bad coffee smell, and the ordinary miracle of a Sunday. Of a Sunday morning with someone who had chosen you. And there were no fireworks, there was no speech, there was no moment designed for anyone else's consumption. There was just the two of them, being completely and devastatingly honest, which is the most intimate thing two people can be. On year to the day after the evening at Vantage Point, Elliot made a reservation. He did not tell her where they were going until they arrived, which was how she found herself standing outside the restaurant on the West Hillside on an October evening, exactly like the first one. Sort of know, the city spread below in its amber quilt, the air carrying the particular, clean cold of autumn at its height. He looked at the facade of the restaurant. She looked at him. He simply held the door. They were shown to the corner window table, the same one. She recognized it, the way you recognize a place that was the site of something significant, with a physical quality of memory that lives in the body as much as the mind. The candles, the city through the glass, the smell of cedar and warm bread. But everything else was different. Argot was different. The Lupine Project had won a regional landscape design award. She had been invited to speak at a conference she had previously only attended as an audience member, through the South, and she had stood at the front of the room and spoken about what she believed, specifically and without qualification. And the room had listened. She had expanded her firm, brought in 2 junior designers, and was overseeing a project that would eventually become one of the largest community green spaces in Portland's history. She stood fully in every room she entered now. She spoke without editing herself into a smaller shape. She had repainted the hallway of her apartment a deep, warm terracotta that filled the space with the sense of something decided and unashamed. She wore what she wanted. She laughed the way she laughed, without monitoring the volume of her own joy. She was, in the most complete sense, occupying her own life. Elliot had changed too. The loneliness that she had identified early, that particular quality of a person surrounded by people who see what they represent rather than who they are, had eased. He was tethered now, grounded in the specific and ongoing reality of someone who knew him rather than his company. So Fuds, who argued with him about design philosophy and remembered when he was tired and hard, and called him out when he deflected and loved him with the cleared, non-transactional certainty of someone who had chosen him freely and knew exactly what she was choosing. They sat at the table and ordered wine and looked at the city below. "How much of this evening do you remember?" Elliot asked. "Everything," she said. "I was a disaster." "Ooh, were extraordinary," he said. You were heartbroken and composed and entirely real. And I looked at you from the bar and thought that whoever got to sit across from that woman on a permanent basis was going to be the luckiest posted person for the rest of their life. He shook her head, smiling. He reached into his jacket. He placed the box on the table between them, small and unassuming, and opened it. The ring was not what she would have imagined, and was exactly what she would have wanted. A hammered gold band, no flash, no performance, and set into it a stone the pale, clear green of new leaves in early spring, the green of things beginning, the green of growth. She recognized it, distantly, as the precise colour of the lupine. "Margaret," he said, and his voice was the same voice that had said please don't go on a night when she had almost left. Steady and genuine, and entirely without pretense. "You taught me that the best design works with what's already there, rather than replacing it. That something growing through concrete deserves a plan built around it, not over it." He paused. "I want to spend the rest of my life building around you. With you. As your partner. In every possible meaning of that word. Will you let me?" He looked at the ring. She looked at him. She looked at the city burning gold through the glass, the same city that had witnessed her lowest moment, and was now witnessing this one, 1,000 par, and she thought about what Mrs. Patterson had meant, which was that you put your truth on the paper and trust that it is enough. He had put her truth on the paper. It had been more than enough. "Yes," she said, completely and without reservation, and in every possible meaning of the word, yes. The sound that rose from the nearby tables was warm and spontaneous, the particular applause of strangers who have been briefly allowed into something real and are glad for the privilege. She heard it distantly because she was looking at Elliot at Voss, who was sliding a pale green ring onto her finger with hands that were not entirely steady, and whose eyes were bright in a way that had nothing to do with the candlelight. They married the following October. The garden. The community garden on the old industrial lot in southeast Portland, in Socialites, 3/4 of an acre, that had once been cracked concrete and rusted fencing, and which was now, 1 year after opening, a living, breathing, abundant thing, wild flowers along the stone paths, a small orchard of native fruit trees in the northwest corner, raised beds where neighbours had already planted, and harvested and planted again, and along the east wall the lupine, spreading now into a long purple ribbon, looked in the October light like something that had always been intended to be exactly there. Rosie was the maid of honour and gave a toast that made everyone cry, including herself, which she managed to find funny mid-sentence, which was very Rosie. Margaret's old mentor from graduate school, 78 years old, and still arguing about design theory with anyone who would engage, sat in the front row and told everyone within earshot, repeatedly and without embarrassment, that she had always known Margaret Calloway would do something magnificent with her life, and that this, gesturing broadly at the garden and the people and the whole improbable beauty of the afternoon, this was what she had meant. Elliot's vows were an engineer's vows, precise, load-numbering, designed for permanence. "You were not the woman who was left behind," he said. "You were always the woman worth arriving for, and I will arrive for you every single day, for every day I am given." Margaret's vows were a designer's vows. "Saw the garden when I could only see the concrete," she said. "You loved the wildflower for exactly what it was, stubborn and unplanned and growing in the wrong place, at precisely the right time. I am so glad I was growing in your wrong place. I am so glad you knelt down and looked." They were married in the garden that had grown from a crack in the concrete, surrounded by what had persisted, underneath the Arctic sky, the October sky. And Philip was exactly where he had always been, somewhere else, arriving a little late to something that no longer included her. So here is what I need you to hear before you go. Because this story is not about a restaurant, and it is not about a billionaire, and it is not about the romantic coincidence of two people being in the same place on the same difficult evening. Those are the circumstances. They are not the story. Story is about a woman who had spent years making herself smaller for someone who never asked her to grow, who had become so skilled at apologizing for her existence that she did it automatically, even at the bottom of her worst evening. Even when she had done nothing wrong, even when she was the only one in the room who deserved to be there. A story is about the moment she stopped, not in rage, not in drama, not in a single revelatory confrontation where everything became clear at once. Just in the quiet, devastating, ordinary moment of recognizing that she had been holding her breath for years, and that she was simply, gently, finally done. You teach people how to treat you, not by what you say you will accept, by what you actually accept day after day, in the small and unwitnessed moments when no one is watching, and you have to decide whether to say this right isn't all right, to let it pass. Margaret let it pass for 4 years, until she didn't. And the moment she stopped, the moment she said, I deserve someone who shows up, not as a statement of anger, but as a simple, factual recognition of her own worth, everything changed. Ought because a billionaire appeared, because she changed. Liet was the outcome, not the cause. E was the cause. Now I want to speak directly to whoever needs this today, because I know you are out there. You are watching this at a time in your life when you are sitting at your own table, and the ETSO person you are waiting for keeps not arriving, and you keep adjusting your expectations downward, and you keep telling yourself that what you are accepting is what you deserve, and you keep finding reasons to stay small. All are not too much. You are not too sensitive, too emotional, too enthusiastic, too detailed, too anything. You are exactly enough. You are enough for the right person, who will not need you to edit yourself to be palatable, who will find your specific and entire self not exhausting, but extraordinary. All are the wild flower growing through the concrete. You are the thing that persisted when it had no reason to persist, that grew when the conditions were against it, that bloomed in the wrong place at exactly the right time. And the right person will not ask you to fit into their plan. They will rebuild their plan around you, because something that determined deserves nothing less. Don't shrink. Shrink. Don't apologize. Don't keep accepting a table set for one when you deserve someone sitting across from you who chose to be there. 8 for the person who shows up. Not just once, not just when it is convenient, not just when the circumstances affordances make it easy. The person who shows up the way Elliot showed up, consistently and specifically, and with the particular quality of attention that says, I see you. All of you, and I am not going anywhere. That person exists, that love is real. And you have always deserved it. If this story touched you today, I need 3 things from you right now. Hit that like button, because it helps more people find this channel and hear the stories that might be exactly what they needed. Share this with someone who is sitting at their own table right now, someone who needs to be reminded of what they are worth. And drop a comment telling me what part of this story hit you the hardest. I read every single one. Every single one. And if you are not subscribed yet, please do it now. I have more stories coming Stories about love and courage and the extraordinary things that happen when people finally decide to take up the space they were always supposed to occupy. Until next time, owe your worth. Never negotiate it. And always, always stay for the breadbasket. I will see you in the next one.